January arrived in Seattle like an unwelcome guest, cold, gray, and relentless. I stood at my kitchen window, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago, watching the rain streak down the glass in chaotic patterns. My reflection stared back at me, and I barely recognized the man looking back. Dark circles under my eyes, the stubble I hadn't bothered to shave in 3 days, the wrinkled t-shirt I'd slept in. This was what 32 looked like when you'd given up. My name is David Chen, and I'd spent the last 2 years perfecting the art of existing without actually living. The breakup with Marcus happened 16 months ago. We'd been together for 4 years, 4 years of building a life together in this beautiful city, of imagining futures, of believing that we'd finally found our person. And then Marcus had gotten a job offer in Los Angeles, and I'd asked him to stay, and he'd said no, not in a cruel way, in the way of someone who'd already made peace with leaving. I'd watched him pack his boxes with the kind of efficiency that suggested he'd been planning this exit for longer than he'd admitted. Since then, I'd thrown myself into work with the kind of dedication that my friends politely called workaholism and my therapist called avoidance. I was a photographer freelance, which meant I could work as much or as little as I wanted, and lately I wanted to work constantly. It was easier than thinking about the empty apartment, the king-sized bed that now felt like a luxury I didn't deserve, the future I'd imagined that no longer existed. My best friend Sophie had stopped asking me out weeks ago. My sister Rachel had stopped calling after I'd declined her dinner invitations 3 times in a row. I'd become the kind of person people pitied, and I'd made peace with that too. So when Sophie showed up at my door on a Thursday evening in late January without warning, I should have known something was up. "I'm not going anywhere," I said before she'd even fully crossed the threshold. "Whatever this is, the answer is no." Sophie, who had the kind of determined beauty that came from not caring what anyone thought, simply smiled and pulled me into a hug. She smelled like rain and the expensive perfume her wife always bought her for her birthday. "I'm not asking you to go anywhere. I'm asking you to get in the shower, put on something that doesn't look like you've been living in it, and then we're going to Marcus's going-away party." I pulled back to look at her. "Sophie, Marcus left 1.5 years ago. And his best friend is moving away too," she said. "Remember Julian? We went to his 30th birthday party at that club in Capitol Hill. He's moving to Portland to be closer to his family. His friends are throwing him a surprise party at the Lighthouse tomorrow night, and you're coming." "I'm not in the mood for a party." "Good," Sophie said briskly, already herding me toward my bedroom. "Because I'm not asking, I'm telling. You've been in this apartment like some kind of sad, beautiful ghost for over 1 year. It's time." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that I was fine, that I was healing, that I just needed more time. But the truth was, I was tired. Tired of the gray apartment, tired of my own company, tired of being tired. So I showered, I shaved. I put on dark jeans and a blue button-down that made my eyes look less haunted, and I let Sophie drag me out into the rainy Seattle night. The Lighthouse was one of those bars that managed to be both upscale and welcoming. Exposed brick, soft lighting, craft cocktails, the kind of place where you could have a genuine conversation without shouting over music. When we arrived, the place was already packed with people. I recognized some faces from around the city. People I'd photographed at weddings or events, people whose names I should remember but had let slip away. "David," Julian appeared through the crowd, throwing his arms around me. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in that way people look when they're about to start a new chapter. "I'm so glad you came. Sophie said she had to threaten you with bodily harm." "She did," I confirmed. I appreciated the directness. "Come on," Julian said, pulling me toward the bar. "You look like you could use a drink that's stronger than whatever's in your apartment." I let him buy me a cocktail, something with whiskey and ginger, and we fell into easy conversation. Julian talked about his new job, about moving back to Portland, about the guy he'd been seeing who'd also made the move with him. There was something infectious about his joy, something that made me remember what it felt like to be excited about the future. I was mid-conversation with Julian when I saw him. He was standing near the window, looking out at the rain, holding a beer and seeming entirely content to be alone. He had the kind of face that made you stop talking mid-sentence, sharp cheekbones, warm brown eyes, skin the color of autumn. His hair was dark and curly, cut short on the sides but longer on top in a way that looked effortlessly cool. He wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans, and there was something about the way he was holding himself, like he was completely comfortable in his own skin, that made something in my chest tighten. "That's Daniel," Julian said, noticing where my attention had gone. "He just moved to Seattle from Portland. He's amazing. You should talk to him." "I'm okay," I said quickly, turning back to Julian. "I'm fine just talking to you." "David," Julian said gently, "I'm leaving. This might be the last time I see you for a while, and you're going to stand here talking to me when there's someone in this room who's been looking at you for the last 5 minutes. I glanced back toward the window. The man Daniel was indeed looking in my direction, and when our eyes met, he smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. I felt something inside me that I hadn't felt in nearly 2 years. It was small, almost fragile, but it was definitely there. Interest, attraction, the first spark of feeling anything besides grief and numbness. "I don't think I'm in a place to," I started. "To what?" Julian interrupted. "To meet someone, to have a conversation, to exist in the world as a single gay man at a bar." He squeezed my shoulder. "Just go say hi. If nothing comes of it, you've had a conversation with a nice guy. If something does come of it, well, then maybe January doesn't suck as much as you thought it did." Before I could argue further, Daniel was walking toward me. The confidence with which he moved suggested he'd been around, that rejection wasn't something that particularly concerned him. He extended his hand. "Hi," he said. "I'm Daniel Morrison. I heard this is your friend's going-away party and I didn't want to impose, but I'm glad I came." I shook his hand and the contact sent a small jolt through my system. David Chen, and you're definitely not imposing. Anyone Julian likes is welcome here." "Is that how you measure your social circle?" Daniel asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "By Julian's endorsement." "Might not be the worst metric," I said, surprising myself by smiling. "Julian has good taste." "Then I'm honored." Daniel took a sip of his beer. "So, David, what do you do when you're not at surprise parties in bars?" "I'm a photographer," I said. "Freelance, weddings, events, sometimes editorials." "You?" "Architect," Daniel said. "I work for a firm called Meridian Design. We do mostly residential work, houses, small commercial spaces. It's good work. I moved here because they're expanding the Seattle office and I wanted the change." He said this casually, but I heard something underneath it. A deliberate decision to move, a choice to leave somewhere and come to somewhere new. I wondered what he was running from or toward. We talked for 2 hours. It should have felt awkward. I hadn't genuinely flirted with anyone since Marcus left and my social skills had atrophied. But Daniel was easy to talk to. He asked good questions. He listened when I talked about my photography, and he didn't do that thing where people just wait for their turn to speak. He actually engaged with what I was saying, asked follow-up questions, seemed genuinely interested. He told me about growing up in Portland, about his large, chaotic family, about the work he was passionate about. He talked about design philosophy and the way buildings could make you feel, about how architecture was really just applied psychology. He made me laugh, genuinely laugh, not the polite social laugh I'd been doing for months, but real laugh that came from my belly. At one point he said, "You have a really beautiful smile. I'm glad I got to see it." I felt my face flush. "I'm out of practice with flirting." "Good thing I'm not," Daniel said, not missing a beat. "But for the record, I'm not flirting. I'm just stating a fact. You have a beautiful smile and I'm genuinely glad I got to see it." Later, when the party was winding down and I knew I should probably think about heading home, Daniel walked me outside. The rain had stopped and the Seattle night was cool and clear. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, the city felt alive to me rather than like the setting for my own private sadness. "Can I get your number?" Daniel asked. "I'd like to take you to dinner, somewhere nicer than a bar at a going-away party, somewhere where I can focus entirely on you without pretending to care about Julian's life choices." I laughed. "You don't even know me." I know that you're a photographer who's been wounded by love, Daniel said simply. I know that you're kind and that you listen and that you have a sense of humor that's a little dark and very genuine. I know that I want to get to know you better. That's enough to start with. He was right, it was enough to start with. Our first date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Ballard. Daniel had chosen a place that was quiet enough to actually talk, and he'd made reservations even though it was a Saturday night, which meant either he had connections or he'd been planning this since the party. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in years. I stood in front of my closet for 40 minutes trying to figure out what to wear, which is ridiculous for someone my age. I settled on dark gray slacks and a charcoal sweater that Sophie had always said made me look sophisticated. I took extra care with my grooming. I even put on cologne, which I hadn't done since Marcus. Daniel was already at the restaurant when I arrived, and he stood up when he saw me, smiling in a way that made my stomach flip. He dressed up 2 dark slacks and a deep green button-down that made his eyes look even warmer than they had at the bar. "Hi," he said simply, pulling out my chair for me. "I'm really glad you came." "I wasn't sure if I would," I admitted, sitting down. "I'm not really in a place to be dating right now." "I know," Daniel said, picking up his wine glass. "I got that sense at the party, but I think you might be in a place to have dinner with someone interesting. The dating thing can come later." It was such a reasonable, low-pressure thing to say that some of my anxiety eased. Over the course of the meal, Daniel told me more about himself. He talked about his childhood in Portland, about his parents who'd been supportive of his coming out, about his career and the projects he was passionate about. He talked about a previous relationship that had ended amicably, about how he'd come to believe that sometimes people just weren't meant to be, even when they cared about each other. When I told him about Marcus, Daniel listened without judgment. "That must have been hard," he said when I'd finished, "watching someone you loved choose something over you." "It was," I admitted. "For a long time I thought it meant I wasn't enough, that if I'd been enough he would have stayed." "But that's not how it works, is it?" Daniel said. "People have their own paths. Sometimes those paths diverge from ours. It doesn't mean you weren't enough. It means his path went somewhere else." He said it so gently that I felt something release inside me. For 16 months, I'd been holding on to the belief that Marcus's leaving was a referendum on my worth. But sitting across from Daniel, who was looking at me with genuine compassion, I realized that maybe it was just about 2 people wanting different things. After dinner, Daniel walked me to my car. The February night was cold and there was a threat of rain in the air. He didn't try to kiss me, which somehow meant that when he asked if I wanted to do this again, the question felt loaded with genuine possibility. "Yeah," I said, "I do." "Dinner next week?" he asked, "or something else? I'm open to suggestions." "Dinner is good," I said, "unless, do you like photography? I'm working on a new project about the city at night. I could use a model, no pressure, but if you're interested." Daniel's face lit up. "I'd love that." Over the next few weeks, January turned into February, and February started to feel less like the dead of winter and more like the beginning of something. Daniel and I fell into an easy rhythm. We'd have dinner on Saturday nights. I'd photograph him on Wednesday evenings, taking him to different locations around Seattle, the waterfront Pike Place Market, the parks and streets that made the city beautiful. He'd come to my apartment and we'd cook together, and he'd tell me about his projects while I listened and asked questions. He didn't push for anything physical, which both frustrated and impressed me. There was an undercurrent of attraction between us. I'd catch him looking at me across the dinner table with an expression that made my pulse quicken, but he was content to let things develop at their own pace. "I like you," he said one night, as we were sitting on my couch watching a terrible reality TV show that had somehow become our tradition. "Not just as a potential romantic partner, but as a person. I don't want to mess that up by moving too fast." "How do you do that?" I asked. "Be so intentional and thoughtful." "Practice," he said, taking my hand, "and honestly caring about someone enough to want to get it right." It was in early February when Sophie first asked me if I was sleeping with Daniel. Because you're different, she said, cornering me at the grocery store with her characteristic lack of subtlety. You're happy, actually happy, not fake happy, and you're leaving the house without requiring threats. So are you guys together or what? We're taking it slow, I said carefully. We're figuring things out. David, Sophie said, putting her hand on my arm, it's okay to let yourself be happy. It's okay to open yourself up again. I know, I said, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Every time things felt too good with Daniel, every time I felt myself falling a little further, there was a voice in my head that whispered, don't get too attached, he'll leave too, everyone leaves. But I was trying to push past my fear and let myself feel things. The turning point came on Valentine's Day, which I'd been dreading for weeks. Daniel had planned something, but he'd been mysterious about what it was. He picked me up on the morning of February 14th and told me to wear comfortable clothes and bring my camera. We drove north toward the mountains and Daniel wouldn't tell me where we were going. It's a surprise, he said when I asked for the 100th time. You're going to love it, I promise. He was right. He'd arranged a private hiking tour with a local guide in the mountains outside Seattle, and we hiked to a viewpoint that overlooked Snoqualmie Valley. The day was clear and beautiful, and from where we stood you could see for miles mountains and forests and sky stretching out to the horizon. It was breathtaking. At the viewpoint, Daniel had packed a picnic, real food, not just snacks. We sat on a blanket with the entire valley spread out below us, and we ate and talked and watched the light change as the afternoon progressed. I know today is a complicated holiday, Daniel said at one point. For people who are single or hurting, I didn't want to do the flowers and chocolates thing. I wanted to do something that felt more real. It's perfect, I said, meaning it. Thank you for this. Thank you for giving me a chance, Daniel said. I know you weren't looking for this, I know you weren't ready for this, but I'm really glad you said yes. I looked at him, really looked at him. His warm brown eyes, his beautiful face, the way he was looking at me like I was the most important thing in his world. And I realized that somewhere in the last month and a half, without me entirely noticing it happening, I'd fallen in love with him. It terrified me, but it also felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since Marcus left. I'm falling in love with you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I'm not sure what that means yet, and I'm definitely scared, but I wanted you to know. Daniel set down his sandwich and pulled me toward him. He kissed me slowly, deliberately, like he was trying to communicate every feeling he had without words. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. I've been in love with you since you smiled at me at the party, he said quietly. I was just waiting for you to catch up. After the Valentine's Day hike, something shifted between us. It wasn't that things became more romantic or more intense. If anything, Daniel remained thoughtful and intentional. But the question was no longer whether this was real. We both knew it was real. Now the question became, what do we do about it? We started staying at each other's places more often. Daniel had a beautiful apartment in Capitol Hill, spacious, with good light, decorated with an architect's eye for proportion and form. My apartment in Fremont was smaller but had character, and he seemed genuinely happy to be there. March arrived with the first genuine spring weather Seattle had offered all year. The rain eased up and the city bloomed. We started taking weekend trips to Mount Rainier, to the San Juan Islands, to Portland to meet Daniel's family. His parents were warm and welcoming, and his mother immediately adopted me as a second son. His father told embarrassing stories about Daniel as a child, and his two younger sisters teased him mercilessly. It was the kind of family chaos I'd always been a bit envious of, and being welcomed into it meant something profound. In April, I had a major realization. I was at work, a wedding shoot in a beautiful garden space in Snoqualmie, when I was photographing the groom's first look at his bride. The emotion on his face as he saw his partner in her dress for the first time was so genuine, so real, that something inside me shifted. I'd photographed hundreds of couples, but I'd been looking at their joy from the outside. I'd been documenting their happiness while assuming it was something that happened to other people. But looking through my camera lens at this couple and thinking about Daniel waiting for me at home, I realized I didn't want to just photograph love anymore. I wanted to live it. I wanted to have the kind of partnership where someone looked at you the way this groom was looking at his bride. That night, I told Daniel about this realization. "So what does that mean?" he asked, pulling me closer on the couch. We'd been spending the evening looking at apartment listings. We'd been talking about maybe getting a place together eventually, something with more space, somewhere that could truly be ours. "It means I want this," I said, "with you, for real, not just dating and seeing where it goes. I want to build something with you." Daniel was quiet for a moment and I felt a flutter of anxiety. Had I been too direct? Had I scared him? "I want that too," he said finally. "But I want to do it right. I don't want to rush you or push you into anything you're not ready for." "I'm ready," I said. "I know that sounds fast, but I'm ready. I know you. I know how you take your coffee and that you're afraid of heights but do it anyway. I know that you call your mom every Sunday and that you cry at movies and that you're the most thoughtful person I've ever met. I'm ready to build a life with you." "Okay," Daniel said, kissing the top of my head. "Then let's do it. Let's find a place. Let's build a life." Finding the right apartment took longer than we expected. We had specific requirements. We wanted something in a neighborhood that was good for both of us, something with a second bedroom that I could use as a studio, something that felt like ours rather than just a place to live. In late April, we found it. It was a craftsman-style house converted into two large apartments located in the Ravenna neighborhood. The upper unit, where we'd be living, had hardwood floors, high ceilings, a working fireplace, and a huge window in the second bedroom that let in beautiful light. The kitchen was galley-style but functional, and the bedroom was spacious enough for both our furniture. More than that, it felt like home in a way that surprised me. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, turning slowly in a circle, and when he looked at me, he was smiling. "This is it," he said. "This is the place where we start our life together." We signed the lease in early May and spent the next 2 weeks moving. Sophie and Rachel came to help, as did some of Daniel's friends from work. By the second week of May, we were officially living together. The first night in the new apartment, after everyone had left and the boxes were scattered throughout the space in various states of organization, Daniel and I lay in our bed. A bed that now belonged to both of us in a space that belonged to both of us, and I felt something settle inside me. This was what it felt like to come home, not to a place but to a person. To know that when I fell asleep, the person I loved would be next to me, that when I woke up, his face would be the first thing I saw. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked, and I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the need to know that he'd done right by me. "Incredibly," I said, turning to kiss him. "Are you?" "More than I've ever been," he replied. May turned into June, and June bloomed into the kind of summer that reminded you why people lived in Seattle despite the gray winters. The days were long, the weather was beautiful, and Daniel and I fell into a rhythm of togetherness that felt both natural and intentional. We established patterns. Saturday mornings were for farmers' market. Daniel insisted on cooking, and he was good at it in the way that only people who loved food could be. Saturday afternoons, I'd work on photography projects while he drew or worked on designs on his laptop. Saturday nights, we'd cook dinner together, often with Sophie and Rachel and Daniel's friends. Our apartment became a hub, a place where people wanted to gather. Weekdays were busier. Daniel would head to the office in South Lake Union, and I'd split my time between editing wedding photos and taking on new projects. But we always made time for each other. Sometimes it was just making lunch together in the morning before he left for work. Sometimes it was meeting up in the middle of the day for a coffee break. Sometimes it was simply being in the same space, doing our own things but together. In mid-June, something shifted in how I thought about us. We were at a wedding reception. One of Daniel's colleagues was getting married, and we were dancing to a slow song. Daniel had one hand on my waist and the other holding my hand, and we were moving slowly, barely swaying. His lips were near my ear, and he was humming along to the song. And suddenly I realized I was completely, entirely, irreversibly in love with him. It wasn't new, it had been building for months. But in that moment, with his arms around me and his body close to mine, and the knowledge that this man had chosen me, had built a life with me, had shown me what it meant to be loved and valued and seen, in that moment I understood the full magnitude of what I felt. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, pulling back slightly to look at me. "That I love you," I said, completely, without reservation. "I'm so in love with you that it terrifies me sometimes." Daniel smiled, that slow smile that still made my pulse quicken. "Good, because I'm completely, without reservation, terrified and in love with you too." He kissed me then in front of all those people, and I didn't care who was watching. This was my life now. This man was my life now. July brought a turning point in a different way. I'd been contacted by a magazine called the Seattle Met about doing a feature photo series. They wanted a collection of photographs documenting queer life in Seattle, couples, individuals, community moments. It was the kind of project I'd been dreaming about, the kind of work that felt meaningful and important. When I told Daniel about it, he was immediately supportive. "This is huge," he said, pulling me into a hug. "This is exactly the kind of work you should be doing. When do you start?" "Next week," I said. "I'm nervous though, it feels important and I want to get it right." "You will," Daniel said with absolute certainty. "Because you care about people, you understand them, you see what's beautiful in them, that's going to show in every photograph." Over the next 6 weeks, I threw myself into the project. I photographed couples at home, at parks, at community events. I photographed individuals who were proud to be visible. I photographed the Pride Parade and the community centers and the spaces where queer Seattle lived and loved and existed. And throughout it all, Daniel was there. He'd come to shoots with me, help me set up lighting, offer a second set of eyes on composition. One evening, I was shooting a couple who'd been together for 40 years, and Daniel watched from the side of the room with an expression on his face that I couldn't quite read. Later, as we were driving home, I asked him about it. "I was just thinking," he said, "about us in 40 years, about what we'll have built by then. It made me happy." "Are you thinking that far ahead?" I asked, surprised. "All the time," Daniel said simply. "I think about you in 40 years, I think about a life with you, I think about growing old with you and loving you when you're grumpy and old. Is that moving too fast?" "No," I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "I think about it too." He looked over at me, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then maybe it's time to make it official." August slipped into September, and September brought the kind of change in weather that Seattle did well. The transition from summer to fall, still mostly warm but with the promise of rain coming soon. Daniel had been distant for the past week. Nothing obvious, he was still affectionate, still present, still the same person I'd fallen in love with. But there was something on his mind, something he wasn't telling me. I'd learned enough about him to know when he was processing something, thinking through something carefully. I didn't push. When he was ready to tell me, he would. On the first Saturday in September, Daniel told me to dress up. He had something planned, but he wouldn't tell me what. I put on dark slacks and a nice button-down, and he drove us north toward the mountains, toward the same hiking trail where we'd gone on Valentine's Day. "Are we retracing our steps?" I asked as we parked. "Sort of," Daniel said, "but this time I'm more prepared." We hiked to the viewpoint and Daniel had arranged another picnic, but this one was more elaborate. There was champagne and fancy cheese and fresh bread from our favorite bakery. He'd even hired someone to come up beforehand and set out a blanket and candles. It was the most elaborate thing he'd ever done for me, and I knew immediately why. When we'd finished eating, Daniel took my hand. He was nervous. I could feel it in the way his hand trembled slightly, in the way he was taking deep breaths. "So," he said, "about a year and a half ago I walked into a bar at a surprise party and I saw this beautiful man standing alone and I thought, I'm going to know that man, I'm going to love that man." And it took you a while to believe in me, and I'm okay with that because I was willing to wait. But now I don't want to wait anymore. He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, beautiful, and got down on one knee. David Chen, he said, will you marry me? I'd had a lot of time to think about this moment since we'd moved in together, but nothing had prepared me for how it would actually feel to have him here, asking me, his dark eyes shining with love and hope and vulnerability. Yes, I said, pulling him up to kiss him. Yes, absolutely yes. When we got home that night, I called everyone. Sophie screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Rachel cried. My parents, who I called next, were thrilled in the quiet way that parents are when their children are happy. Daniel called his family, and his mother actually shrieked with joy. We sat in our apartment that night with the ring on my finger, looking at it in disbelief. This was real. We were getting married. Chapter 6, Planning Forever. The wedding planning process was both easier and harder than I expected. Easier because Daniel and I were in complete agreement about what we wanted. We didn't want a large, formal event. We wanted something intimate, something that felt like us, a small gathering of people we actually cared about rather than an obligation guest list. We chose a date in November, gave ourselves 3 months to plan. Harder because planning a wedding, even a small one, involved a lot of decisions, and I was anxious about getting everything right. It's just a party, Daniel kept reminding me. A really nice party where we promise to love each other forever. Everything else is just details. But I want the details to be perfect, I said, for you, for us. They will be, Daniel promised, because we're doing it together. We found a small venue in Ballard, a beautiful loft space with big windows and exposed brick. We booked a photographer I trusted, a catering company that specialized in small events, a florist who understood what we wanted. For the ceremony, Daniel's father agreed to officiate. He'd become a minister specifically for this purpose, which was both hilarious and deeply touching. In October, about a month before the wedding, I had a moment of panic. Daniel came home from work to find me in the bedroom, surrounded by wedding planning materials, looking at pictures of flowers and arrangements. What if this is a mistake? I said. What if I'm rushing into this? What if you figure out that I'm too much or not enough or... Daniel sat down on the bed and pulled me toward him. David, he said calmly, stop, listen to me. I know you're scared. I know you have a history of abandonment, and I know that's making you doubt this. But I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. I love you, all of you, including the anxiety and the self-doubt and the beautiful, sensitive, artistic heart that sometimes gets overwhelmed. I want to marry you, that's not going to change. How can you be so sure? I asked. Because I choose you, he said simply. Every single day I wake up and I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you for the rest of my life. That's what marriage is, it's choosing each other over and over again, and I'm ready to do that. I buried my face in his neck, breathing him in, letting his certainty ground me. Okay, I said, okay, let's get married. The week before the wedding, I realized I hadn't been anxious in days. The anxiety had been replaced by a kind of excited anticipation. I'd catch myself smiling randomly, thinking about the fact that in a few days Daniel and I would be married. Legally, officially, forever, or at least for as long as forever lasted, which I'd learned was really all any of us could promise. The rehearsal was on Thursday evening. We gathered at the venue with our wedding party and family members. Daniel's sister was standing up with him and Sophie was standing up with me. We walked through the ceremony and everything felt real in a way it hadn't before. At one point, I caught Daniel's eye from across the space and he winked at me, a small, intimate gesture that nobody else noticed. I felt something warm bloom in my chest. After the rehearsal, we went to dinner at a restaurant near the waterfront with both our families. Daniel's parents were delightful, his sisters were funny, and my parents, who I'd been worried might be awkward, seemed genuinely happy to be there. My mother even found herself in conversation with Daniel's mother about traveling, and by the end of dinner they were already planning a trip together. That night we went back to the apartment. Daniel and I had decided not to do the whole don't see the groom before the wedding tradition. We didn't believe in bad luck and we both wanted to fall asleep next to each other. But after everyone left and the apartment was quiet, Daniel suggested we do something. I want to write something for you, he said, to read during the ceremony, but I don't want you to read it beforehand. I want you to experience it with everyone else. Okay, I said, can you tell me what it's about? No, he said with a small smile, that's the whole point of the surprise. He spent a few hours writing, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of tea, and